Coming out. My name is Vicki Beam. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Mayor and City Council's Commission on Property Tax Reform, and this is our second public hearing. The Mayor and the City Council established the Commission earlier in the summer. The Commission's charge is to recommend ways that the state and the city, because both the state and the city are involved in the design of the property tax system. And our charge is to make recommendations about how to make the system fairer, simpler, and more transparent. And we want to hear from you about your thoughts about how we could do that, your thoughts about any problems with the property tax system as it exists now. The goal of the commission, the sort of timeline that we're thinking about, is that we are holding public hearings throughout the next month. We will then deliberate and work on coming up with recommendations. We will be putting out some preliminary options or recommendations early in the winter, in January or February. We will then be back here in Queens to hear from you about those and to hear about other matters that we didn't have a chance to address. So we will look forward to speaking to you both tonight and over the next 6 months or so. So a couple of things, and then I want to have each of the members of the commission introduce themselves. A couple of things so that we have time to hear from everyone. We will we ask you to try to limit your comments to about 3 minutes. You can always submit your testimony in writing. If you don't get to some of the topics that you would like to cover, you can submit your comments in writing. You can upload them as whatever is more convenient for you. So we will hear from some of your elected representatives and their staffs first, and then we will take you in the order in which you signed up as you came into the auditorium. So we really look forward to hearing from you. We'd like to hear about your experiences, both in terms of the fairness of the taxes, your ability to understand what's going on with your tax bill, the appeals process. We'd like to hear about your experiences there. We'd like to hear, from you about the problem of properties appreciating, and yet your income's not necessarily keeping up with that, and ways to deal with those issues. So we really are looking forward to hearing from you on this wide range of issues. So let me start at my left, Francesco. If you could introduce everyone.
Yes, I'm Francesco Brindisi. I'm representing the Director of the Office of Management and Budget.
James Parrott, Director of Economic and Fiscal Policies at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School.
Carol O'Claricon.
I told you, Vicki Beam. I'm a law professor at NYU Law School, and I am one of the faculty directors of the Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy.
I'm Mark Shaw. I'm the other co-chair. I'm from Queens, and I have a day job at CUNY as a senior advisor to the chancellor.
I'm Alan Capelli, and I'm a tax-paying single-family homeowner.
I'm Gary Rodney. I'm another commission member. I finance affordable housing across the country.
I am Ken Knuckles. I'm from the Bronx. I'm the owner of a two-family home, and I'm also vice chair of the New York City Planning Commission.
Hi, I'm Latanya McKinney. I'm an ex officio member representing the City Council.
I'm Ray Majeski, and I'm an ex officio member representing the City Council.
Okay, so we're going to start with some of the elected officials that are here. The 3-minute rule we're going to try to apply to everybody, but we sometimes are a little bit more lenient with elected officials. but we hope everybody tries to keep to the 3 minutes. The clock is on my right, so your left as you come up. So not to sound like I'm playing favorites, but Barry happens to be my council member, and so he did sign up and get here first, so he is the first speaker. Barry?
Pretty good for government work. This thing on? Thank you all for being here tonight. We're in Councilman Deep Village District, just so we get that.
Maybe it's not on.
All right. All right. Better?
Much better, much better.
I'm going to read through this. I really want to thank you for being here this evening, coming to the Heart of Queens here at York College. And I'm going to try to stick to 3 minutes. You've heard my name. I'm Barry Gordonchick. I represent the 23rd Council District in Eastern Queens. I represent a mostly residential area that contains many 1- and 2-family homes as well as many co-ops and condos. I'm here to testify that after hearing from my constituents, I strongly support the effort to make the city's property tax system simpler, clearer, and fairer. In addition, while I understand that the city requires revenue to fund essential services, in recent years the city has become much more reliant on property taxes, and more of that burden has fallen on the shoulders of middle-class owners of 1- and 2-family homes and middle-class co-op and condo owners. This dependence on tax revenue from middle-class homeowners is regressive and runs counter to our collective belief that those with greater means should carry more of the burden. First of all, it's imperative that the city work with the state legislature and the governor to institute a cap on property tax increases similar to that which is in place across the rest of New York State. In order to make the cap revenue neutral, perhaps the city could reset each property to be taxed at its full market value upon sale of such property. This way, older people who have lived in their homes for 40 or 50 years will not be forced out of their home by rising property taxes. At the same time, when the property is sold to a new owner, the new owner would be responsible for property taxes based upon the new selling price. Another major issue, and perhaps the major issue in my district, is the inequitable taxation of co-ops and condos. While many people think of co-ops and condos as luxury Manhattan skyscrapers, in my district, co-ops and condos allow middle-class families to affordably purchase their own homes. Most co-ops and condos in my districts can be bought for approximately $200,000. They represent affordable home ownership that allows teachers, police officers, firefighters, transit workers, postal workers, nurses, and other members of the middle class to own their own homes in which they can raise their family and attend some of the best schools, I may add, in the city of New York. They also allow older adults to affordably downsize from single-family homes to more manageable 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. While these affordable co-op and condos can be bought and sold at a reasonable cost, they are burdened with property taxes that can be higher than those on million-dollar homes. Many co-op and condo owners have informed me that their real property taxes on an apartment worth $200,000 to $300,000 are $5,000 to $6,000 a year or more. The problem with the taxation of co-ops and condos is that under state law, co-ops and condos are taxed as if they were rental units and not private homes. Because the law treats those apartments as commercial interests, they are assigned fictional value rental units, values that are usually much higher than their actual worth, leading to tax rates that are much higher than those on single-family homes. It is imperative that the city work with our legislative counterparts. I'm glad to see Senator Comrie is here in Albany to find a solution to this problem. I'm almost done. In closing, I would just like to make the general statement that fixing the property tax system must be part of the city's quest to tackle its affordable housing crisis. Many people in New York City claim to be progressive, but what is more progressive than ensuring that middle-class New Yorkers who would like to own their own home can actually afford to buy one? If we make home ownership more affordable, whether for a single-family home or a co-op and condo, we will reduce some of the extreme demand burden on our rental stock. Many renters strive to own their own homes, and the Commission should include affordable home ownership among its top priorities. As we tackle New York City's housing crisis, affordable middle-income home ownership must be part of the solution. I want to thank you for listening to me tonight, and I hope you'll listen very, very carefully to everybody else, as I know you will. Shout out to Mark Shaw, my constituent and my neighbor, and to LaTanya and to Ray. Otherwise, I'll never get a call returned. So thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Barry actually almost introduced our next speaker, Senator Leroy Comrie.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. I'm Leroy Comrie. I have the honor to be the senator for the 14th Senatorial District. I want to thank the commissioners for being here. I also want to just point out that LaTanya McKinley is a resident of Southeast Queens and lives in the district, so I want to just thank her for her services and for being head of the New York City Council Finance, and Ray McKinley, and I know most of the folks that are serving on the board. I want to thank you for your service in this vein as well. This is a critical component. I'm not going to read every word of my testimony, but I'm glad that you are here at your college so that our homeowners can be heard. The property tax is essential to the proper functioning of New York City government. The very collection of it allows our government to operate efficiently. The property tax is thoroughly and unmistakably a regressive tax in meaning that it impacts negatively those who can least afford it, principally households with incomes under $100,000 a year, which will create acute effects upon those who make $59,000 and under. Frankly, those are mostly the people that I represent. People who are told for decades trying to raise a family, work full-time, and have saved up enough money to buy a house in Southeast Queens. Now they may be retired and they are maybe blessed enough to have a pension alongside Social Security, but they're stuck. Yet these people are being hit with a flat tax that has no correlation in their ability to pay, one that is not fair or equitable with respect to their neighbor who may be a block, borough, or B train ride away. Reports and research abound and are rife with recordings of how unfair the current system is. Excellent work has been done by folks that have pointed this out, but I just want to talk to you about a couple of things that are critical that people can hear. Among the issues that need to be addressed is the fact that the current regressive system basically applies a one-size-fits-all methodology to assess to an area that is, and to areas that are inherently different. For example, the borough of Queens represents almost half of all Class 1 properties in the entire city, accounting for over 275,000 1, 2, and 3 family homes. Among the majority of homes in the 14th Senate District, including Rosedale, Springfield Gardens, St. Albans, Queens Village, Hollis, Paisley Park, Jamaica, Queensville, and Briarwood and Kew Gardens are in the 400,000 to 500,000 range, which is on the low end of the property values for the borough and among the lowest in the city. However, paradoxically, in Queens, the average property tax bill for a resident after exemptions is over $6,000. Furthermore, 30% of the Class 1 properties in Southeast Queens have the very highest effective tax rates in citywide, which affect the majority of areas in the 14th Senate District with the highest tax rates in all of the city. Again, I'll try to respect time and not read the whole thing. I'll submit my entire testimony. I do have some suggestions. I will release this as well in my weekly newsletter, but we have some real problems here. I have a primarily senior household that is house rich and cash poor. I have a lot of veterans in my district that need to be done. The issue of the fact that our property in Southeast Queens seems to get assessed first and regularly as opposed to other areas of the city that haven't been assessed at all is inherently unfair. Finally, I just want to congratulate some of the Department of Finance Queens staff that has been very helpful to my office and to all of our offices in Southeast Queens. Sonia Villamil, Ed Conserve, and Marcel Dixon have been great people in coming out to community meetings, giving seniors an opportunity to save money and veterans, and I just want to thank them publicly for all their work. Also, commissioners, I want to thank you. I know that this is a difficult job for you to look at, but this is a critical opportunity to create fairness and parity in our tax system. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Councilmember Ericka Rich, who emanates from Queens, but Western Queens, so we're still allowing him to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. I do represent a district in Southwest Queens, but I'd want to say how blessed the people are in Southeast Queens to be represented by such fine elected officials. Of course, the previous speaker being chief among them, Senator Comrie, I had the pleasure of serving in the City Council with for several years, and I noticed that Councilmember Richards is here as well. They are very strong advocates for their constituents, and it's nice to see them join me in a bipartisan issue here, which I think is finding a fair balance when it comes to our tax system. I know it's been said previously by many speakers that the current system is regressive. That's an understatement, to say the very least. It's not very transparent. It's not a fair process. It sometimes rewards the bad guys and punishes the good guys, for lack of a better term. I want to illustrate this point just for a moment, if I can. My office recently pulled the property tax bill in Bell Harbor in the Rockaways, an area that I represent, that sold last year for $915,000. It's a nice price. The property had a tax bill of $10,384, an effective tax rate of 1.13%. If you compare this to Mayor de Blasio's neighborhood in Park Slope, which I thought was very creative of me to do, I found 10 properties in the mayor's district with the tax bill of in the $10,000 range last year. Except those sale prices, according to the Department of Finance records, range between $2.7 million and a high of $4.3 million. All right, so let me just throw this out there. A fair tax system, I believe, is one that is based on market value, where homes with the same value pay the same taxes. Currently, we tax less valuable properties at a higher rate, and this disproportionately hurts communities of color and non-white districts throughout the city, and we know that. There was a lawsuit recently that was filed that Councilmember Richards and myself, and I believe Councilmember Jamani Williams signed on to. We were ultimately thrown off by the law department. That's a story for another day. But we tried to point out so many of these inequalities that exist in the system and to point out how unfair it is and how much it hurts, especially boroughs outside of Manhattan. So many communities throughout Queens have been undergoing tremendous transformation. Immigrant families, people coming here for a piece of the American dream, and yet they're finding it harder and harder to support their families and make ends meet. We have to do something. We have an opportunity to do something meaningful. Is everybody going to be happy? No, but we know that the current system, it doesn't work, and the current system is broken. And finally, I just want to say this. Over 1 million New Yorkers have left the state of New York in the past decade. They've gone to Florida, North Carolina. We all know friends and family that have moved out of the state. And a politician recently said, I don't want to say who, but he said that they were leaving because of the weather. It has nothing to do with the weather. It's the taxes, stupid. To take the line from the 1992 presidential race when they said it's the economy, stupid. It's the taxes, stupid. The taxes are too damn high. We've got to do something about it. We've got to make it fair and equal across the board. And I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councilmember Donovan Richards.
Oh, yes. All right, good evening. Good to see you, Vicki. Good to see all of you. Thank you for having me today. I'm Councilmember Donovan Richards, proud to represent the Republic of the Rockaways, a part of it with Ericka Rich, the 31st District, which also includes Laurelton, Rosedale, and Springfield Gardens. And I am here today to speak on behalf of my constituents who are primarily comprised of people of color. And the time for an equitable property tax system is now, and one that does not unjustly impact communities such as Southeast Queens and the Rockaways. Prime example of the unfairness that we see here is the outdated assessments which place an enormous burden on seniors and working families trying to make ends meet. Now, the very same communities that were overwhelmingly impacted by the foreclosure crisis in which we sit in right now, right outside these doors, as you know, former Commissioner Beam, are the communities that are largely footing city's tax revenue. So today I'm here primarily to call on the commission to really look at the way you are assessing these properties. I also want to point out that as we move into the conversation of affordable home ownership, as we move into the future, the more these property taxes continue to rise, the more we're taking away the opportunities for future generations. And I think that's something we need to keep our eye on. So this has a very an adverse effect on future individuals from our communities who are looking to obtain home ownership as well. I also just add that the office has done a great job at doing outreach, but that is not enough. On a daily basis, once again, we are hearing from seniors. I can't tell you the amount of calls that my office is fielding on a daily basis on how much the property taxes are rising and how much of an impact that is putting on seniors who are living on a fixed income. So I know we're going to continue this dialogue over the course of the next few months, but I'm hoping that this commission is really going to take a serious look at ensuring that this system is more just for everyone. And I'm encouraged by this commission being formed. And I just want to add, we looked at liens as well, the lien sales, which also impact these communities. When you look at the water bills, when you look at property taxes, these are the things that are taking away the opportunities that many of us came to this community to get, and that is the American dream, and that is home ownership. So if we're talking about economic justice and adding equity across the city, the biggest way we can do that is to ensure that our residents have access to home ownership and that we're addressing the foreclosure crisis. And the only way to do that, once again, is to ensure that there is a fair property tax system across this city. So thank you for hearing me. We look forward to the continued dialogue over the course of the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Janice Schreiber.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Sorry about that. I don't think it's possible for you to come up with a fair system. Every single person that's talking is coming from a different neighborhood, a different situation, yet we all have the same problem. I am the president of a co-op, Beach Hills, in Northeast Queens. Also the secretary of the President's Co-op and Condo Council that have been fighting for tax fairness since 2011. My co-op was built for World War II veterans. It's all working class people, teachers, cops, just like most of Queens, and the senior citizens that have been living there since the 1950s. We have seen our property taxes go up 113% in the last 10 years. This is unsustainable. It's becoming unaffordable. The seniors cannot afford to live there. And because we're a co-op, we have no cap. So the city can raise us however much they need to back into the number that they need to pay the bills. I've been keeping close track of our assessed valuations and our actual tax for the last 10 years. And every year, 13 to 14%. Since 2011, in 2011, 27% of our budget went to property taxes. Now, over 40% of our budget goes to property taxes. This is unsustainable. We are affordable housing. The mayor talks about affordable housing over and over and over. You can buy an apartment where we live for $200,000, $300,000, yet that same apartment pays $6,000 a year in property taxes. And I hear what homeowners are saying about their $400,000, $600,000 house, where half the value and twice the property tax. I'm gonna have to cut to the end and just say that I hope you guys can be miracle workers, and I hope you can take into account everybody and try to do something that's fair. And just remember, the co-ops in Queens are not what people think of when they think of co-ops. We're not luxury buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Councilmember Danique Miller.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And I'm excited to see the commission out here, and I'm more excited to see constituents. I was hoping that this room was absolutely filled up, because we now in Southeast Queens are beginning to have a conversation that they have on the other side of the aisle about tax burdens. And I was excited when the administration decided that he was going to convene this advisory commission. I was a little less excited when I saw, even though I had some of my really good friends and some folks and advocates that we have worked with for a really long time on a number of issues concerning communities, homeowning communities, communities of color, and so forth. But when I saw the original makeup of this commission, it was lacking folks who share our values of what we have in the borough of Queens, particularly in southeastern Queens, where we have predominant home ownership here, as well as cooperatives, and certainly we felt that our voice wasn't there. And I want to thank my colleagues here and us putting our heads together and making a few suggestions, and now that we have our council finance chair and Dr. Majeski as well, folks who really understand the depths of and needs of these communities here. So with that being said, there's a lot that has to be undertaken, and certainly at the forefront is the formula, this inequitable formula that disproportionately burdens communities like Southern Queens when you look at the ratio around the assessment, where you can have a Fifth Avenue address or a Park Slope address and a home with that has 2 or 3 times the value, and we're paying more taxes, right? Certainly that is a problem. Certainly that is something that we have to talk about, and we have to talk about that burden that has consistently been placed on homeowners, the backbone of this city. And we understand that 2/3 of the city rent in some shape, form, or fashion, but our voice has to be heard. And so we look forward to working with the commission. We look forward to working with our constituency and ensuring that this voice is heard. But certainly what is happening now cannot continue to happen. We cannot continue to lift this city up. We cannot continue to bear the burden and the brunt of the burden while as Class 1s, and while Class 3 and 4 get away with little or any increases. And certainly that has been recognized by the administration and supported by the fact that there was an attempt to have a rebate, a water rebate, and there was a pushback on that to bring relief to homeowners and cooperatives. And that did not happen. We got pushback on that. We attempted to move a $400 rebate on homeowners that we attempted to relieve the burden on those homeowners. we have to consider these things. We have to consider the fact that the middle class and working families cannot continue to be disproportionately impacted by unfair assessment, and we have to work on that. So I hope that, I'm glad that we are here in this community of homeowners and cooperative owners, and that you see that we're struggling, and that we have been the steadfast, we have been that support, we have been that tax base. When all else fails, when businesses come and go, we still own homes and pay taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker also represents me in Albany, Assemblyman David Weprin. Did David leave? David Weprin.
No.
He must have stepped out, so we'll come back to him if he comes back in. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Maisel. Maisel? Maisel, thank you.
Okay, good evening. My name is Jeffrey Maisel. I'm an attorney for 30 years in New York City. I have the distinct pleasure of representing over 20,000 units of cooperative condo housing. So I want to just take the opportunity to thank this board for the unenviable task that you have. Good luck in your endeavors, and we look forward to working with you every step along the way. I'm here just to discuss this issue through the lens of the co-op community. It's a complex issue. I don't pretend to have the answers. I've been working on this issue with many of the people in this room and some of the people in that panel up there for over 8 and 9 years. And we agree that it's a difficult task that has no simple answer. I'm on the front lines in the co-op community. I attend over 150 board meetings and shareholder meetings, and this is the #1 issue affecting co-op homeowners in the city of New York. The system is broke. I was thinking of things to say tonight, and I said, if this task force or advisory council was charged with the idea of coming up with the worst possible tax system, you'd say we're done, because that's what we have today.
Success. Okay.
You try explaining to a shareholder in a co-op who's on a fixed income, whose taxes just went up 50%, 100%, why it's going up. Explain how they're being market value based on rental income. For rentals that don't exist anywhere near that co-op, it makes no sense. The system makes no sense. And then on top of that, the system is punishing the fine people that live in co-ops and condos in the city. And the numbers are, it's basically a poison pill on the budgets. I've attended dozens and dozens of meetings in rooms this size filled with shareholders. And I invite you, and I will invite you, next time we have a meeting on taxes, to see firsthand how this affects shareholders, because it's ruining and poisoning the housing stock. It's a budget buster. You heard it goes from 25% of the budget. Now we're 50%. I have many of my co-ops in the past 5 years, the major increase in their budget, and sometimes the only increase besides wages and health care for union employees is taxes. So this is something that needs to be addressed. Another thing to note is that co-op and condo owners of 10 units and more in the city of New York are the only housing stock in the state that do not enjoy a tax cap. There's no rhyme or reason for it. There's no benefit to it. There's no reward for it. It's just the way it's ended up. That's wrong. And just in closing, I just want to say that the co-op and condo community is very interested in being involved in this process every step of the way. We look forward to meeting with you, not just in these hearings, whether it be the whole advisory council or one at a time, and we're very interested to see your findings and working with you all along the process. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your work on this matter.
Our next speaker is Matthew Joseph.
evening, members of the committee. I'm Matthew Joseph, a New York City assessor, New York State Certified General Appraiser, and a member of the Columbia Society of Appraisers, and Vice President of the Assessors Union, Local 1757, DC 37. I'm testifying on my own and do not represent the Finance Department of the City of New York. COIB told me that I should mention that. Okay. I'm not representing Department of Finance because I work for Department of Finance. I'm pretty sure that we all know what are the problems with the New York City property tax system. So I'm proposing the following solutions without wasting our time discussing the problems. Some of the suggestions will need changes to the real property tax law and New York City rules and regulations. 1. Full market value assessment. All properties should be assessed at full market value and determine the tax based on the full market value. New York City employs fractional assessment of market values that are beholden to a ratio based upon tax classes. Eliminate different assessment ratios and transitional assessment. There will not be any need for special ratios for equalization and or physical changes. To do this, we will have to hire qualified appraisers and assessors. Next, income-producing properties should be valued based on market income. Third, create a new tax class for owner-occupied one-family houses only. Income-producing 2- and 3-family houses should not be valued along with owner-occupied one-family houses. Residential owner-occupied condo units should be included in the new tax class. Next, tax rates should not be increased more than 0.5% without water approval. Eliminate, this is going to be interesting, eliminate all exemptions except personal exemptions.
Excuse me, will you be submitting this in writing?
It's all, I did.
Terrific.
Yeah, I
thought this
uploaded
would-
it
thank you.
onto the website.
Thank you.
Okay? In New York City, about 60% of properties enjoy some form of tax exemptions. Exemptions in reality are subsidies. Next, a separate Department of Assessment separate from the Department of Finance should be created. I know Cleric and Mark Shaw is going to like this. Created with the Chief, Commissioner Jiha is not here anyway, with the Chief Assessor reporting directly to the Mayor. The Chief Assessor should be made an 8-year term position. This would give the office stability, strength, and independence from outside influence. Only experienced assessors or appraisers should be appointed as Chief Assessor. The management and supervision of assessing personnel should be assigned to employees who have a high degree of assessing appraisal experience. Assessors should be compensated according to industry standards. The unrealistic workload of assessors must be reduced to manageable levels so that quality assessments are arrived. Eliminate the request for review and request for administrative review applications. All reviews should, after the tentative assessment, publication should be done by the Tax Commission only. Tax Commission should be expanded with qualified and experienced assessors or appraisers. My testimony is uploaded on the website. If you have any questions, my email address and telephone number is on the testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Barbara Leonardi.
He works for the finance.
Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. As a co-op owner, I learned it's very convoluted as to whether or not we're viewed as a owner of our apartment or shares in a corporation. Originally, the Attorney General viewed us in securities. We were then converted to real estate. So the Attorney General recognizes co-ops as real estate. So I'm wondering how we got put into the lump of being viewed as commercial and do not enjoy the cap of a residential. So I'm hoping, and have to say I'm a little bit disappointed that there isn't a commissioner that's more involved with co-ops to understand the Attorney General's relationship, because it is quite confusing. You have no protection with your securities, and you have no protection with your real estate. Nobody seems to want to own you. So I'm hoping that somewhere you look into where the documents and how it was determined that co-ops are commercial. And if they are, to view it as the portion that is commercial be taxed as commercial, but the portion that is residential be rated and prorated as residential. Somehow come up with a proradiation as to whether or not the entire building is commercial, because we're not enjoying a profit. So, you know, we're really viewed more as residential. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would also like you to know that I do live in a co-op. I am a member of a co-op, and I am a former finance commissioner, so I'm aware of what you are speaking of. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker, I think, also represents co-ops, Bob Friedrich. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay.
You can go ahead on.
Yeah.
You can go ahead, sir.
Okay, my name is Bob Friedrich, and I'm president of Glen Oaks Village, the largest garden apartment co-op in New York with 10,000 residents. The greatest threat to the fundamental affordability of our co-op and condo communities lies with the city's failed property tax and valuation system that taxes co-op and condos at significantly higher rates than 1 to 3 family homes. The system imposed double and triple digit valuation increases on co-ops and condos in Eastern Queens a few years ago and continues to wreak havoc by not providing the needed predictability to our budgeting process. Remember that. Co-op and condos Class 2 properties are valued as if they are fictional rental properties that generate profits. They are neither. The entire system is unfair, inequitable, and a fraud, which is why we are here today. It's imperative that this commission recognize that most city co-ops are not the multi-million-dollar co-ops found in Manhattan, but are more like the affordable $200,000 ones found in Glen Oaks Village and other co-ops throughout Queens. The current tax system is threatening our affordability and eroding the middle class with its paralyzing annual property tax increases. Glen Oaks Village comprises 134 two-story buildings on 20 block-in lots. These block-in lots are almost exactly alike, but the assessed valuations vary more than $1 million on each, and increased last year between 3% and 17%. There's absolutely no reason for this. Similar block-in lots should have similar valuations and annual increases. The tax commission must seek to create an assessed valuation system that is objective. If you move to a fair market price valuation formula, you must adjust the applicable tax rate, or we will experience staggering tax increases. Because of the way our budgets and the manner in which each co-op owner pays their calculated share of the co-op's property taxes, we ask that you avoid a complicated system of abatements and exemptions which create significant difficulties for us. We also ask that the Commission support an immediate property tax cap for Class 2 properties, as is done with Class 1 properties, until a permanent fix is made. We do not want to reinvent the wheel and ask that you support extending to all co-ops the 830 cap, 8% per year or 30% over 5 years, that currently exists on co-ops with fewer than 11 units. Finally, we ask the Tax Commission to seek to restore our ability to apply for J51 tax exemptions, which allows us to partner with the city in improving our aging infrastructure. J51 eligibility is based on the average assessed valuation per unit on each block and lot. It was recently lowered from $40,000 to $32,000, forcing many affordable co-ops whose average assessed valuation was between $32,000 and $40,000 out of the program. We are asking that the eligibility threshold be restored to $40,000 and be indexed to inflation. This will allow many affordable co-ops to again participate in the J51 program. This small change would be revenue neutral to the city because of the limited number of affordable co-ops that would be restored to the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sandra Draves.
Hi. Thank you, Commission, for allowing me to be here to put a face on this property tax issue. My name is Sandra, and I own my home in Glen Oaks, which, for those of you who doesn't know Glen Oaks well, it's modest garden apartment type housing. My house itself cost about $200,000 when I bought it. I'm a civil servant. I vote in every election. I donate blood, and I volunteer in my community. In other words, I'm decidedly middle class. We, the middle class, are the bedrock of our city. New York City cannot prosper without a strong middle class, and we need your help, Commission. We want fairness and parity with 1 to 3 family homes. We need equality in taxation, and ask for you to put a cap in place until meaningful changes are made. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Warren Schreiber.
Good evening. My name is Warren Schreiber. I'm the co-president of the President's Co-op and Condo Council. In addition, for the past 18 years, I have served as the president of Bay Terrace Cooperative Section 1. You're going to hear testimony about the assessed property tax evaluations for cooperative properties being determined by a process that is arbitrary. The inconsistencies leave cooperative properties in a state of flux and unable to accurately budget. I agree and support all that testimony. However, this evening, I want to address the property tax appeal process for cooperative properties, a process that is broken. Every January, the New York City Department of Finance publishes the tentative property tax assessments. Bay Terrace Cooperative Section 1 and almost every other cooperative corporation will retain a certiorari attorney to appeal the assessment. Certiorari attorneys who are successful in reducing the corporation's property tax will take anywhere from 15 to 25% of the reduced taxes as their fee. Think of this for a moment. Cooperative corporations are paying to correct the arbitrary and inaccurate evaluations set by the New York City Department of Finance. We are paying to recover funds that should never have been charged to us in the first place. I would like to propose some changes which would ease the onerous financial burden placed upon the shareholders of middle-income shareholders in the form of cooperative property taxes. Number one, simplify the appeal process so that cooperative corporations can submit property tax appeals without retaining the services of an attorney. If a certiorari attorney is retained and successfully lowers the assessed evaluation, the certiorari fee be paid by New York City. And number 3, cooperative corporations can be reimbursed for certiorari fees in the form of a tax credit. It should be remembered that housing cooperatives are the last bastion of affordable middle-class housing in the city of New York. And I just want to make one last comment that the term certiorari, I actually looked it up, and they had asked the 9 justices of the Supreme Court, and they all pronounced it differently. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I wish you great success moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, will you submit your testimony in writing? Or you? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And I just want to thank members of the co-op community in Queens who've talked to Council Finance on many occasions and have helped us understand the problems of the co-op community. I'm also a co-op owner, by the way.
Our next speaker is Bob Ricken.
I think sometimes we're preaching to the converted. I believe that you are a group that know all of the things that we're trying to express tonight. I've been on my board at North Shore Towers for about a decade, and I lose credibility all the time when I tell them, for example, we pay $40,000 is our budget, $44,000. Our taxes are $20,000, $100,000, I'm sorry. What happens is when we go back and tell them we've talked to you, you're the most knowledgeable people. I'm not going to make a long speech tonight. All I want is for you to be able to be the advisory commission, to talk to the powers that be in the city, the mayor, etc., because you know as much as this whole audience knows, and I'm counting on you to make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Butler.
Thank you very much for taking the opportunity to invite us here to address the issue of tax. I own properties in Queens for a number of years, and I'm the president of the Richmond Hill East Business Persons Corporation, which is a non-for-profit corporation which I founded 25 years ago to make the community a better community without asking the city for any help, period. But all I've got from the city is nothing but taxes. Taxes. I try to grow my businesses and build the buildings. They want more taxes, more taxes, more taxes. I have to hire attorneys to fight and try to get a couple of dollars back, and I think you all know this. I'd love to know a few figures. I don't know if you have them here tonight, but maybe if you could get them, I'd appreciate it. The taxes that leaves Community Board 9, I just use Community Board 9 because that's the community board that represents me. The taxes that leaves that community board, how much are they? How much comes back into the community board? Because I know what I pay, and we're talking a lot of money. I mean a lot of money, not pennies. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because I own a number of properties. And I think it's time that you started to realize that without us, you're not there. We don't need you. Unless we're here, you have no job in there. So I'd appreciate it, listening to all the people tonight. They've absolutely asked you and begged you to look into this and to sit down and look at it with a common sense, not a political point, a common sense, okay, and address the issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Alice Christie.
I have terrible balance. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob, very much. No, I'd rather stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
He's my savior. I want to thank the commissioners, for holding this meeting tonight, because this is incredibly important. And I also want to thank Barry Gordonchick for supporting this situation. It's nice to see you again.
Right behind you.
My name is Alice Christie, and I work with Bob, and I am, as you can see, a senior. And Robert Dillon is a fellow resident of mine, and the gentleman that wrote this letter, that he called me and asked me to read it to you, he is also a resident of ours. The letter reads, "To the Commission, as a retired senior citizen and shareholder of a cooperative apartment in Parkwood Estates, Belrose, Queens, my development is subjected every year to overinflated property tax assessments and property tax increases. In a recent year, the assessed property value of my development increased by 27%, and the property taxes rose at the same rate. However, actual property values have remained stable. These increases are passed on to us in the form of higher maintenance fees, which we cannot afford. The tax rate was even higher for 2018. Currently, co-ops are classified by state law as Class 2, which include commercial rental properties, but we should be classified as Class 1, non-commercial properties. There are 2 bills in the State Assembly that would do this, but they have languished for years because Mayor de Blasio opposes them, and it's easy to see why. He can increase revenue for the city by using an outdated and, I can't see this in this light, outdated and unfair state law that permits him to impose grossly overinflated property taxes. The city claims that all this is perfectly legal, but in my view, that's John Day's view, it amounts to criminal extortion. The city cannot balance its budget by victimizing co-op residents, many of whom are seniors. Funding must come from other sectors, or non-essential services must be cut. Co-op residents must have immediate tax relief. While the commission comes up with a solution, the mayor must approve the assembly bills to reclassify co-ops. Until a truly fair and just schedule is reached, a property tax freeze for co-ops must be implemented by the mayor. Now, these bills in the State Assembly, they have been there for a long time, and they do serve as a solution a possible solution to this problem by reclassifying us as under Class 1, 1A, and benefiting from the percentages of the single home classification. We are not rentals. We do not make a profit, and we are running in the red. And seniors and young families and other people with disabilities, they cannot afford these increases, and something serious must be done about it. And seniors and all of us, we are really hurting, and we are looking to you to solve this problem. You need to look at those bills and see what they have in them, because they have some really good solutions. Thank you, very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is John Procida. You can try that mic also.
Hello? Good. My name is John Procida. I'm at the Mount Park Civic Association, which is basically Flushing Whitestone. I'm also a member of what was an organization called SCAR. I don't know if any of you know that or remember that, but it was about 38 years ago. SCAR was a state coalition against reassessment. And in 1975, there was a lawsuit given by a lawyer named Hellerstein, and he took it up to the state Supreme Court, and he won. And in winning, it was determined that the method of assessing property in New York State was not good. And so the state imposed upon us that we had to change. Well, the first idea that came out was 100% reassessment, which is an absolute disaster and should never, ever happen. And our organization of 1,400 civic associations across the state fought that. A number of assemblymen lost their jobs because they were for 100% assessment, okay? Now, one thing I don't know people understand, the assessment of property is controlled by the state. The tax rate is controlled by the city. The biggest problem we got is the city keeps spending more money and more money and more money, and who's going to pay for it? We, the homeowners, or the taxpayers, or the property owners, let's be precise, okay? The system, I sat in with Speaker Stanley Fink and a couple other people and wrote this law, which is, by the way, S7000A/A9200. The law is a good law. I've heard people say that everything is broken. It's not a good law. 100% of such assessment would be, yes, a way to make everything even. But if you did it, you would cause a lot of disasters. People would lose their homes. All of a sudden, their taxes could double and triple. Because, you know, when you talk about assessing property, everybody's talking about residential here, but it also includes commercial. And when you lump commercial and residential and do 100% assessment, taxes on commercial stuff will go down, the residential will go up to pick up the difference, and we get killed. Now, want to go 100%? Go to Trenton, New Jersey. They just went to 100% assessment. One lady, for example, had a house that she was paying about $6,000 a year in rent, in taxes. It went up to $40,000. Other people who were paying $5,000 went up to $12,000 and $15,000. That's 100% assessment if you want to do it quickly and correctly, but you're going to kill people by doing it. The system we came up with was a system of adjustment. The 20% rule, the 6% in 1 year, 20% in 5 years. It was a method of adjusting, because prior to that, incidentally, it was worse. It was when they built the house, they assessed it, and they never changed that. Okay, so, at any rate, I believe that the law is still a good law. And the only thing I will admit, that the co-ops fell through a crack. They should be really involved with the 1 or 2, 3 family houses. One other point I want to make strongly about. In that law, it says the city cannot tax the 1, 2, and 3 family homes more than 15% of the city budget. I would like to see if that's being obeyed. I doubt it very much. There were 4 sectors, and each sector was given a certain percentage of the city budget that they had to pay. And the 1, 2, and 3 family houses are supposed to pay no more than 15% of the budget. Does any of you people can tell me if that's being obeyed? You're the city. Is it being done?
Yes.
You're sure? I don't think it's being done. And matter of fact, I've been thinking of having a class action suit to sue the city for not obeying the state law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I must say you're the first person to come testify in support of 7000A. Our next speaker is Sharon Handy.
Good evening. I am Sharon Handy. I am a resident of Addersley Park, landmark community. I'm also on the board of Addersley Park Community Civic Organization. I am not representing them in that regard. I'm speaking on behalf of my husband and myself. We've been in our home for over 28 years, and we are now retired. We find that our taxes have increased significantly in the last few years, and we find it to be a hardship. We felt very, very angered when we read in the newspaper a few years ago about Mayor de Blasio's taxes, and that he was paying less taxes than we are. And he can very much well afford to pay more. We can't. My husband couldn't be here this evening, but he had a suggestion, and I'm going to convey his suggestion to you. He said, our current system of computing our real estate taxes puts too much weight on the estimated market value. He feels that the estimated market value is the primary source used to calculate our annual property taxes. Now, he's a tax preparer. He has an accounting degree. So this is all coming from him. I can't support it anymore. But we're hoping for the success in creating revisions in our tax system that is fair, equitable, and affordable to middle-class 1 and 2 family home owners. We don't want to lose our homes or be forced out due to exorbitant taxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, may I just, could you tell me approximately what your taxes were last year?
They're over $5,000. They had been around $3,000, and now they're over $5,000.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mary Ann Rothman.
I think she wants to do a different spiel in each.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thanks for holding these hearings. My name's Mary Ann Rothman. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums, which provides information, education, and advocacy for housing cooperatives and condominiums throughout the city and beyond. You've heard from lots of our members here tonight. CNYC and its Action Committee for Reasonable Real Estate Taxes have been working since 1990 for a property tax system that would deal fairly and equitably with New York City taxpayers and that would be easy to understand. We believe that this requires a complete overhaul of our present property tax structure with appropriate consideration for commercial taxpayers as well as owners of residential properties. This, I believe, is the task that you have before you. I wish you lots and lots of good luck. I don't think any tinkering with the present system is going to do us any good at this late date. The top priority for my members in co-ops and condos would be to have equal treatment for all forms of home ownership. All residential property should be assessed in a uniform way and subject to the same tax rate. Mitigating overlays, sometimes called circuit breakers, should govern reductions in these taxes for homes that are occupied by their owners as their primary residences, and for owners meeting other qualifications, persons with disabilities, seniors, veterans, those meeting income qualifiers, and anything else that I might have forgotten. But these reductions would disappear, of course, when the resident left the home or otherwise no longer met the qualification. And we would respectfully suggest that changes be phased in so as not to be too disruptive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Rothman, can I ask you, when you say all treatment for all residential property, are you including rentals in that residential property?
I think, which is why I'm using the slightly vague term uniform way of assessing them. I think, yes, we have to look at home, you, not I, thank goodness, have to look at homes and find a formula for assessing homes, and then I believe very strongly in a further reduction for primary residency, for, which we now have by fiat in co-ops and condos for the property tax abatement system, but we don't have it in Class 1, where there's an enormous amount of non-owner occupied units.
So you would essentially collapse Class 1 and Class 2 as all residential?
Well, I don't want to talk about the present system, but yes, I would be very interested in a residential class of taxpayers and a commercial class of taxpayers, and a clear link so that all the taxes were never thrown at the commercial taxpayers, nor, as someone else suggested, the residential taxpayers. I don't think it would happen that way. The residential taxpayers are perceived to be the voters. I rely on your creative thinking, your combined very good knowledge of the field, and I look forward to your preliminary report.
Thank you.
I'm not following, Marianne, I'm just not following this exactly. You understand the distinction between commercial and residential. There is commercial residential, right? There's rental property, and it could be in Class 2 now, and it could be some of it's in Class 1, right? There are some.
No question about it. There's a wide variety of properties that are primarily residential, but that have commercial assets in them. There are also an enormous amount of co-ops and condos that were created by conversion that still have rental tenants.
Right.
So I didn't say your task was easy, but I would hope that you'd look at the clear residential commercial distinction, and then acknowledge that part of residential property has commercial components.
Right. We have to deal with the same confusion you're dealing with. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Benjamin Udell.
Thank you for this hearing tonight. My name is Benjamin Udell. I'm the president of the 49-unit co-op in Woodside, Queens, Hicks Stryker. And I'm not going to try to read everything that I prepared. I'll just try to focus on one aspect that haven't gone to depth here, which is the apparent arbitrariness.
Could you speak up, or could you raise that microphone?
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do you raise this thing? I'll just bend over.
Here's Bob Friedrich when you need him.
You've got, somebody here has another job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, our co-op in Queens was a working class co-op. The building was built in 1917, and the co-op was incorporated in 1920. And it continues to be working class, though the values have gone up. But what's really gone up is our estimated market value in comparison to other co-ops in Woodside. We've soared above the other 20. We used to be mid-range, ranging from number 5 to number 14 in the ranking. Now we're like number one and we're running away. There are two other co-ops within 1 minute's walk. That one of them is one of the lowest valued, the lowest valued in Woodside, Sunnyside, and Jackson Heights combined. And we can't use this as an argument for the tax commission because we aren't allowed to use comparisons between co-ops. And yet, this same graph that shows it is certainly enough to anger everybody in my co-op. I've tried another move. Look at the current values of our past comps. And they have indeed, those current values are lower than our current comps values. Why are we being paired with more expensive comps? I don't know. It would be nice if there were some more. This is an area where there really needs to be more light so we know how to go for the tax commission. Then looking even further, it turns out when the place a minute's walk from us, 3805 65th Street, has the same comp as we do, there are different numbers for the comp when they're used for them than when they're used for us in the same year. Their gross value per square foot, their gross cost per square foot is, how can the same rental comp have different numbers depending on which co-op it's compared with in the same year? Much higher when used for the other co-op than what it is for us. Okay, it's opaque, and there are many other things people said tonight I agree with, but I don't want to, I have 30 seconds left. So, and I think some of this could be addressed even now. I think everybody would agree that kind of murk, whatever your theory about how you revise the laws, that kind of murk does not need to be there. And some of it doesn't even need a change of law to fix. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sumit Sharma.
Hi, I'm Sumit Sharma. I'm actually speaking on behalf of Assemblyman David Webren, who, due to an unforeseen circumstance, is unable to join today, but he was planning to attend and did prepare testimony, which I will be reading on his behalf and which has been submitted to the commission in advance. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, members of the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform. I'd like to start by thanking you for convening these hearings throughout the city and giving the public a chance to voice their opinions on this important matter. Since 2010, I've represented the 24th Assembly District in Queens, which spans from Richmond Hill to Glen Oaks, encompassing a number of different property tax classes. And prior to that, I served in the council as representative of the 23rd Council District from 2002 to 2009, where I was chair of the council's Finance Committee. As a seasoned public servant and in the Queens community, and as a homeowner, I'm familiar with the issues of the current property tax system. Property taxes are the largest single source and most stable source of revenue for New York City and must be protected to ensure our continuing prosperity. However, we can accomplish this in a manner more equitable than the current system. The four-class property classification scheme, which has been in place since the 1980s, has resulted in some property classes bearing a disproportionate tax burden than other classes, and most significantly has led to a system where Queens and other outer borough residents are taxed more in proportion to the value of their houses than homeowners in wealthier areas. As an example, my office found that some condo owners in my district, some of whom contacted my office about their rising property taxes, are taxed at a rate of 200 to 300% more than owners of some of the priciest residential properties in the city. While certain condo owners in my district pay an effective tax of 3% to 5% of the estimated market value of their property, we found that certain residents of 157, also known as the Billionaire Building, pay no more than 1.54% of an effective rate, while the residents of the $100 million penthouse pay an alarmingly low rate of 1.41%. This is inexplicable. Not only is the city of New York losing massive amounts of revenue by not taxing the wealthiest property owners at rates comparable to middle-class communities, but is also effectively creating a subsidy for the owners of the most expensive properties on the backs of middle-class property owners and renters. This is in large part due to the assessment caps, which keep the value of properties from appreciating, which in turn allows neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Manhattan with greater appreciation of value to have artificially low effective tax rates. In addition, a large portion of the property tax burden is being shifted to Class 2 properties, defined as all other property that is not Class 1. and is primarily residential, meaning rentals, cooperatives, and condominiums. A report from the Furman Center for Urban Policy found that Class 2 properties accounted for 36% of the city's property tax revenue, while only accounting for 24% of the citywide market value, with Queens having higher Class 2 rates than Manhattan and Brooklyn. In 2006, the New York City Independent Budget Office found that condos and co-ops in Park Slope and Carroll Gardens were valued at 12.5% of their sales-based market value to those in Jamaica, which were valued at 44.8%. In response, I introduced a bill in the Assembly, A510 Fund 1, which would classify owner-occupied co-ops and condominiums as Class 1 properties. This will reduce the property tax of co-op and condo owners who face significantly higher property taxes than their neighbors in single-family homes. At the same time, it retains the Class 2 property status for those who use co-ops and condos as investment or rental properties. I'm also a sponsor of another bill, A354A, sponsored by Assemblyman Ed Braunstein, which would create a new class for certain Class 2 properties by moving all residential properties not classified as Class 1 or 2 into a new Class 5, making Class 2 just residential co-ops and condos. Either of these solutions would bring us a step closer to a fairer property tax code by allowing for more uniform treatment for similar type properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is William McDonald.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before this commission. I address this commission from 3 perspectives: as a Queens homeowner, a veteran, and on behalf of the New York State Conference of the NAACP. As you know, the NAACP filed an amicus brief in Tax Equity Now, New York's lawsuit against the city. When it enacted the Fair Housing Act in 1968, Congress declared a goal of eradicating racial discrimination in housing and recognized that the courts have a vital role in achieving that end. The evils that Congress targeted 5 decades ago are all too present today and all too apparent in New York City. The city's arbitrary and regressive tax system undermines the Fair Housing Act's promise to imposing unequal burdens on struggling minority residents, restricting the supply of affordable housing that minorities need the most, and reinforcing stark residential segregation. That is not just a political problem, it is a civil rights legal crisis that the NAACP is committed to fixing. New York City's discrimination property tax system places an unlawful and unequal burden on hundreds of millions of dollars on minority residents and perpetuates some of the worst residential segregation in the nation. A cursory review of the data shows that the property tax system disproportionately disadvantages Black residents. Homeowners in districts within New York City that are at least 3/5 Black, for example, pay effective tax rates that are roughly 20% higher than in districts that are at least 3/5 white. And apartment tenants, who are disproportionately likely to be Black, bear much of the burden of effective tax rates several times higher than those on condominiums and cooperatives, more likely to be owned by white residents, which by law should be treated equally for purposes of tax assessment. Perhaps most important, the property tax system does not just harm minority residents, it harms all of the city residents by perpetuating some of the worst residential segregation in the United States. That effect creates and deepens inequities in education, societal outcomes, and even public health. And it is present, and it prevents the growth of cross-racial understanding at a time when it is sorely needed in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service, sir.
Our next speaker is Anthony Rivers.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Rivers. I'm the founder of an organization called People for the Neighborhood, and I'm here to talk about Southeast Queens in particular. I noticed that on the dais we have, I'm sorry, I don't recall your name, but I know you're from NYU, the Furman Center, and I know you guys did extensive research on the disproportionate and unfair practice of the taxes being implemented on certain communities. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Thank you. For the people who don't know in the audience, to recap on what Mr. McConnell said, this is a problem that has stemmed over the last 2 decades to 3 decades. This is nothing new. Unfortunately, what has happened in Southeast Queens, and I'm speaking specifically to that, is that certain areas in this city were given incentives so that people did not move out in the 70s. They instituted certain statutes barring the city from raising their taxes a certain percentage, while in Southeast Queens, we still suffered with an abnormal rate compared to value. And that has become problematic over the last 3 decades. And if I'm correct, even in your studies, it shows that minority communities in general throughout the city pay a higher and unfair proportionate rate compared to our Caucasian and more affluent neighborhoods. And that's a problem. The Constitution and various provisions of New York real property tax law requires that the property taxes be imposed uniformly within each property class, but yet the city has saw fit not to do that. And this is a problem, like I said, that's been stemming for the last 20 to 30 years. And it's unfortunate that it's only been brought to light most recently by the class action lawsuit in Supreme Court that has reared this ugly head of the property tax situation once again. And we're faced with this. And it's unfortunate, like I said, that minority communities, especially Southeast Queens, we're suffering. I myself am a property owner of the last 24 years, and I look at the taxes that I pay is probably 33% more than the mayor pays on a $1.7 million home in Park Slope. That can't be. His house is worth $1.7 million. He pays about $3,200 in that area, and yet our house is worth one third of that, and yet I pay 33% more in taxes on my property than he does. Something is definitely and drastically wrong with that, and I urge this panel not to just convene for the sake of convening, but to actually take action and come up with a fair and uniformed way to impose taxes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Assemblyman Edward Bronstein.
Thank you very much. Let me start just by thanking the Commission for meeting. This is it's going to be a monumental task that you're asked to do, and I appreciate that you're willing to undertake it, and I look forward to working with you any way possible. I'm Assemblyman Ed Bronstein. I represent the neighborhoods of Whitestone, Bayside, Douglaston, Little Neck, and parts of Floral Park in Northeast Queens. And I apologize, I just put together the testimony. I'll submit it written tomorrow, but I'll just read it. I've been working to bring attention to the inequities in New York City's property tax system since I first took office in the State Assembly in 2011. That year, the city changed the valuation methods it used in assessing some Class 2 properties, resulting in substantial assessment increases for many co-ops in Assembly District 26. For years, co-op owners in Northeast Queens have been paying higher effective property tax rates than similarly situated homeowners in other parts of the city. When the city compounded this problem with assessment increases, some as high as 150%, the constituents I represented protested and began demanding action. Since that time, I've been working with the co-op community, specifically with the President's Co-op Council, which I think you heard from earlier, to bring tax relief to co-op owners in Northeast Queens. I would submit that the consistent advocacy for tax reform from the President's Co-op Council was a factor in the decision to create this commission. In the years following what became known as the tax revolt, I've made several legislative proposals to reduce the property tax burden for middle-class co-op owners in Queens. In 2003, I worked with the Bloomberg administration to successfully increase the state co-op condo tax abatement for middle-class co-ops valued at around $600,000 market value and less. We were able to make this change revenue neutral by disqualifying those units not held as primary residences from receiving the abatement. In 2016, I was able to bring modest tax relief to some co-op owners by reaching an agreement with the de Blasio administration to increase the assessed value at which co-ops would qualify for the J51 tax abatement program. Finally, over the last several years, legislation I support to impose assessment caps on co-ops and condos, similar to the protections in place for single-family homes, passed the Senate but stalled in the Assembly without support from the City of New York. The legislation referenced above gives an indication of the goals I've sought to achieve for co-op owners through amendments to the current statutory framework. I expect that the Commission is going to put forward a more comprehensive property tax reform proposal, but I hope that it seeks to accomplish the same goals I referenced earlier of taxing co-op owners in the same manner as single-family homeowners. While I'm hopeful that, I have one more paragraph. While I'm hopeful that the Commission will put forth a plan to bring relief to co-op owners, I must caution that offsetting expected revenue by increasing property taxes for Class 1 properties such as those in Northeast Queens is not an acceptable solution. According to a recent Citizens Budget Commission report, single-family homeowners in my district, Northeast Queens, already pay median effective property tax rates of between 0.81% and 1%, which is generally on par with the citywide median of 0.89%. In the past, home ownership in Queens has been considered desirable because local property taxes, even when combined with the New York City income tax, have been considerably lower than property taxes in neighboring Nassau and Suffolk counties. After the state legislature instituted the 2% property tax cap on all localities outside of New York City, the differential between property tax costs in Queens and those of Nassau and Suffolk counties continues to narrow. I frequently encounter young couples who want to stay close to their families in Northeast Queens, but choose to settle in Nassau or Suffolk because it is more affordable. Increasing property taxes now will only exacerbate this growing problem. Once again, I've been working on this issue for 8 years, and I just want to urge you to remember, and I'm sure you will, that any proposal you put forward is going to need legislative approval in Albany. I mean, that's the real complicated matter. And I want you to know that you can reach out to me and several of my colleagues who are submitting testimony along the way if you need guidance about what we think we can achieve, because at the end of the day, we're only going to be successful if something does get passed. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
Our next speaker is Corey Burek.
I want to thank the commissioners, and some of you in my prior lives I've met with you and discussed this issue with. I don't know if you remember Commissioner O'Clerigan, but I met with you in your office with the council member I had worked for back in the day in the 80s when you with Assistant Commissioner Stark.
And we're so much younger now.
Yes, of course, and help. Again, I'm Corey Burek, and I've researched and written and testified on real property tax reform going back to my time at Hofstra Law School. You can find much of my research and recommendations on my website, strategicpublicpolicy.com, and at the end of my document there's a link to all that material. My research reflects my service in government for a city council member and 2 borough presidents, candidates for citywide office involvement in civic groups, including co-founding and later leading this borough's civic umbrella organization. I've testified at many city council hearings. A complicated formula apportions the property tax revenue proportionally by the state law among the 4 property tax classes. In addition, the same law limits the tax assessment increases and perpetuates inequities, and this limits the ability of the city to capture market value increases on many properties without regard to property occupancy and ability to pay. And this system was originally intended to promote home ownership, but now it begs for reform. Many proposals and recommendations aim to modestly help some groups, but in doing so unduly might help others who already strongly benefit from the existing system. So it's important we be very careful in how we shape things. And I take a different approach that focuses on helping lower and modest income homeowners and tenants with an aim to support affordability in housing accommodations. A report last year helped direct renewed focus on the many homes over $1 million. You heard some other testimonies about that. And that pattern of unfairness has to be addressed, and soon. It exacerbates economic inequality, and it begs for the remedy I advocated since my service on my then council member staff some 3 decades ago when we first met Commissioner McClarican. And it's basically to revise the city's property tax system as it applies to 1, 2, and 3 family homes, the Class 1 properties, that we should treat owner-occupied housing units alike for real estate taxation purposes and create a homestead exemption to ensure that the city's middle class and those less well-to-do can afford to remain. The first step, and it's very easy to do. When we first met, it wasn't as clear, and we were arguing about that, as I remember, but now with the STAR system, we know who the absentee homeowners are because they're not getting the STAR. And if we treat them as rental properties, the city can capture billions of dollars, and that would allow us to institute and fund reforms without messing with the folks that are all concerned about how they be treated. Secondly, I'm recommending a homeowner exemption valued to homes valued under $800,000 and to reform the tax rate accordingly, so the higher valued homes in that group would pay would get a little bit less of a benefit. Just, by way of example, and I don't mean to go over too much, but you heard the distinctions about like homes in Park Slope. And I saw one story about a Laurelton homeowner last year who was paying about $1,000 more than homes in Park Slope, including the mayor's home. And I looked in homes in Belrose, where I live, a couple hundred more in that regard. And I think if we look at it, for example, the taxes on homes where I live work out to about 1% of market value, and that Brooklyn luxury townhouse referred in that article paid about 0.3% of its market value in taxes. And that example demonstrates how city assessment practices unfairly benefit the wealthier New Yorkers who own the expensive homes and apartments. So if we look at these kinds of reforms I suggested and that are clearly more outlined in the various reports and testimonies that I have on my website, I think we can really make a difference, and I'll be glad to meet with you individually or however you want to do to work on that.
You'll submit this in writing?
It's already, you should
there?
already have
Okay.
copies of it. It was submitted to the website as well.
Thank you.
Perfect,
Thank you. Thank you, Corey. Our next speaker is Faith Goff.
Good evening. Hello.
And thank you for forming the committee and coming out in support of the communities in Queens. I'm a homeowner of a 2-family home in Queens Village, and I've seen where my property tax have escalated to the point I feel as if it's a noose around my neck. I didn't have a chance to really pool all my resources to come here tonight, but just to simply
Could you just get a teeny bit closer to the mic?
Simple to point something out. I saw last year where my
property tax, my home was estimated to be $695,000, and based on that, my property tax was $7,000 and change. This year, for next year, it's estimated to be $852,000, an increase of $157,000. And based on that, my tax will be almost $8,000 annually. No one has ever come to my house and done a walkthrough. I think they just stand by and look at the outside and say, oh, that should be valued at this price or that price. And based on that, they make a determination as to how much tax I should be paying. Right now, I'm suffering. I'm a homeowner, single woman, and I can't have my tenant eat the cost of whatever it has gone up. I'm a nurse, I work for New York City, and I feel like as a city employee, they should give me some kind of break. I know I'm not gonna get it, but I would really, really appreciate it if this committee tonight hear our plight and do something to help us, because right now we're all struggling in order to stay afloat and to stay in our homes. Another facet of that is, I believe, due to the increase in property taxes, it's forcing a lot of us out of our homes. And if we can't afford to stay in our homes, where are we gonna go? And that's all I have to say about that. And I'd really, really appreciate it if something can be done to help us.
Ms. Goff, can you put this in perspective by telling us, in your second unit, the unit that you rent out, how have the increases in the rent, if any, that you
I
passed
can't
on?
afford to. If I increase my tenant's rent, I'm
Could
gonna
you
lose
come to
that.
the phone?
I can't afford to do that.
Right.
Because everyone is struggling. And if I'm afraid to increase the rent, that if I do that, I will lose them. And then it'll be an empty apartment sitting there, and then I'll definitely lose my house. I won't be able to afford it.
Can you, not to pry, but can you give us a sense of how much the rent that you charge is and how much it's gone up in these?
I haven't raised my tenant's rent in 10 years.
In 10 years.
I have not.
Thank you for doing that. But okay.
Our next speaker is Elizabeth Mooney.
Okay, good. Hello, I live in Forest Hills, Queens. I'm a homeowner, and so you had an appraiser speaking earlier, and I thought I would just offer some solutions. I have no idea if they're any workable, but I think, as I've heard before, that the comparable sales method of assessing 1- and 2-family homes is willfully blind and totally ridiculous. There's a legal 2-family, 3-story house, catty corner to ours, that the city has put a market value on as for tax purposes, pretty much identical to ours, even though our house is, 2/3 the size and is not a rental property on the second floor. Right there tells me you've got something really bad, terrible going on, and I think that with all the data that's available, that's ridiculous. Square footage, number of bathrooms, things like that could be input into the computer, even if you don't have enough assessors to walk around. It should really be very straightforward. Google Maps, that'll do it. Any 2- or 3-family home is by definition an income-producing property, even if family members are renting the other units. Therefore, they should be taxed at a higher rate than owner-occupied units, meaning houses. Non-resident owners of single-family homes who rent them out should be also taxed at a higher rate. We have a neighbor across our shared driveway. He owns 2 single-family homes, and he's been renting them out for nearly 30 years that we've lived there, and he hides everything from the city. All the bills come to the rental properties, so he's getting by, and then all the rest of us are picking up the slack, and people like him ought to really be nailed. Any home, apartment, condo, or co-op owner who rents out their dwellings to Airbnb or wherever, they should be taxed as commercial. Condominiums should, this income capitalization method of assessing them, it really needs to go. It should be market value like everybody else. Under no circumstances do I believe the city should legalize illegal conversions, which is what I've heard talking about, because we've had, fatal fires in Queens and in the Bronx that have killed firemen and killed construction workers, and it's all these houses blocked up illegally with too many people living in essentially tenements. And one last thing, the city should impose an absentee owner pied-à-terre tax on the various oligarchs and their ilk who buy up ginormously expensive residences that serve either to launder or bank their cash. If they can pay that much for a place to live that they don't even live in, then they can afford to pay into the system that makes their property so desirable. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Letitia Moore Jackson.
Good evening. When I asked to speak, I wasn't sure how this thing was set up. I really almost had a question, but I just want to
raise the mic just to, yeah.
Okay,
Thank
I just
you.
want to reiterate what most homeowners in Southeast Queens have said tonight as far as improving the system of estimating the value of the homes in Southeast Queens. A lot of the homes in Southeast Queens are 100 years old. They are frame houses, and they are not truly valued at the estimate values that we receive in those yearly estimates of what the house is valued at. When you go to sell your house, you'll never get the amount that is assessed in your tax value of your home. So you're paying for years and years and years, tax based on a house they're saying is $500,000, and then when you go to sell your house, maybe you can get $350,000 for it. And if one of these shyster realtors come around, they'll offer you $250,000 for your house, and if you're desperate enough, you will sell it, which is what's going on in Southeast Queens. Like I said, the value of the house is not what is estimated, because after 100 years, the wear and tear of your house has gone down. So it's not even worth it. Some of these houses don't even have finished basements, and you're estimating them at $500,000. You think somebody's gonna buy a home today for $500,000 with a basement that's not finished, with a bathroom that was built in 1940 that hasn't been improved because people are paying so much mortgage and tax that they can't afford to fix the houses while they're living in them. So as they're paying for this house, it's going down at the same time because they're not able to keep up the improvements that need to be made. Of course, you have to make necessary improvements if your plumbing goes bad and other things, but as far as your roofing and your flooring and all the different things that go along with home ownership, we're on a losing end in owning homes in Southeast Queens. And seniors, which I am not, but I can speak on behalf of my mother, are mostly affected when they live on fixed incomes and then they find themselves to be a widow. And now that income has dramatically changed, and they're still paying taxes on a house that's well overvalued what it's worth. So I would ask this commission to please look in reforming the way these houses are actually assessed and give us a tax value that's more closer to what they're actually worth and something that we can possibly afford a little better and live a little better. Because we're just spending all our money and we have nothing left over when you own a home in Queens, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Richard David.
Good afternoon. Evening. My name is Richard David. I'm a district leader in the neighborhood, and I'm a member of Community Board 9. I applaud the mayor and the speaker for setting up this commission, and I welcome you to our neighborhood. I own my own home, and so does my mom, and so does my brother, and many people in my family who also live right here in Southeast Queens and have lived here for over 25 years consistently. One of the interesting things is that also the homes are all 1, 2, or 3 family homes. One of the interesting things is that two of them are side by side on the same exact block, the same exact square footage, same property size. They are identical, and they pay drastically different property tax rates. When you talk about 1, 2, and 3 family homes, and particularly here in Southeast Queens, there are some things that you have to consider when you're thinking about the burdens that are on on homeowners. In this part of the city, we have the highest rate of foreclosures anywhere in the country. Today, many years after the housing and financial crisis. One of the reasons for that is because of New York City's property tax rates. One of the differences is how it's applied here in Southeast Queens. The other factor that's worth mentioning here is in these homes, a lot of people, my family included, depend on income that come from tenants. That's how when we think about buying these homes, we think we're going to be able to pay the mortgage over 30 years. What happens, though, in 1 and 2 family homes is a lot of landlord-tenant disputes. And landlords are very often unable to afford high-priced attorneys to go to housing court and evict tenants. And even that process takes 6 months to a year. Even after an eviction is done, even with Section 8 housing, homeowners are still unable to recover dues that have been assessed to them because these individuals have disappeared or they're no longer employed or other reasons. You're unable to collect that rent that's owed to you, even in a court judgment. In Southeast Queens, and I would say that it's excessive and disproportionate here in this neighborhood, you have an excessive amount of DOB inspectors, HPD inspectors, ECB violations. It is out of control. And what that also causes is another burden on taxpayers. And that's important because when you think about things that are normal here and in other parts of the city where there are 1, 2, 3 family homes, a lot of people live in basements. It is a solution to the housing crisis we are facing, as long as they're safe and affordable. But the city continues to fine and tax homeowners who are property owners, and here in Southeast Queens, it's contributed to one of the highest rates of foreclosures in the country. Today, after the housing crisis, people aren't even talking about it anymore. So, I recognize that I'm out of time and I did submit testimony, but I want you to think about also some of the anomalies. Like, if a property has a garage, it pays higher taxes. It's odd because in this part of the city has not invested in any kind of adequate mass transit. There are no subways. You have to have a garage and a driveway to get around because you own a car. And you're taxed more for it through your property taxes. And you're not getting, this commission, you invited questions about how taxes are assessed. You didn't invite questions, and maybe your task isn't to also think about how these taxes are spent. And when we talk about fairness, I think both sides of that equation matter, because here, where we pay such high rates in taxes, if how it's spent isn't a part of the conversation, it will inherently be unfair. I've submitted my testimony, and I know you have a tough job ahead of you. Thank you for giving us and for patiently listening to so many of us and myself tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. David, did you appeal the 2 houses right next to each other that are taxed at very different rates?
We talked about it, and they were afraid to because somebody was going to lose. And it's either one person was going to have an increase or they were both going to go up. And it's likely that they were both going to go up based on how things go in this part of Queens. So we just sort of shut our mouths and keep it going.
I just wanted to clarify, are these houses semi-attached or are they just 2 houses that are next to one another?
Attached on both sides. They're row houses.
They're row houses.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Thomas Green. second speaker to use the microphone on the right.
I don't think you can consider me a left-winger. Maybe a little more conservative than that. My name is Thomas Green. I'm a single-family homeowner from Flushing. I'm also a dinosaur, meaning my family has a single income, which is me working. My wife is home with our 3 children. She has raised them from day one, and I pay to put them through college. When I look at my property value assessment, what I see is it's been marked to market. And that implies that I'm experiencing a windfall gain in the increased property values. But I haven't sold my house, so I haven't seen a gain. So what I was able to afford 15 years ago, when my children were young, and my wife and I made the joint decision that we can afford to have a single income. Well, now we're being squeezed because our property value has increased, the assessment has increased, and my taxes have doubled in the time that I've been in the house. So my income hasn't doubled, and as my family has grown older and they have greater needs, I have more outflow than I do income. So I think it needs to be evaluated. How long is a person living in a house to also go into the formula of how much should we assess in taxes? Because currently it's assuming that you have a realized gain when the increase in the property value is an unrealized gain. If you're an investor and you own securities, you don't evaluate your value, right, by saying, now I have more money in my pocket because the stock is worth more, because the value of that stock could drop at a moment's notice. So you don't have a gain yet, and the federal government doesn't tax you on unrealized gains. So we're all being taxed on unrealized gains in property values. So I want to congratulate 2 points. One is Mayor de Blasio's effort for income equality by taking our earnings and distributing it however he chooses across the city. The other one is that for Queens being the second most populous county of over nearly 2.5 million people, the mention of this meeting was so very poorly announced to the public that we can see that there are maybe 200 people here tonight in a population of a county with over 2 million people. So I guess that helps keep the crowd down. So thank you for your attention and your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kevin Foley-Littell.
Hello. Thank you for doing this tonight. It's very impressive. I feel like I've really gotten. I feel like I've gotten quite an education just listening to some of the speakers, and it really is impressive. And we think about the difficulties in the world right now and in our nation in terms of people just yelling at each other and being terrible to each other, and to come together like this is really sort of very nice. I mean, it's not to my talk here, but it was just something that I was thinking about. I'm representing the Steinway Street Business Improvement District. Many of you know Steinway Street, and we are real boosters for the street. However, I must tell you that our street is really in very difficult situation. We have more than 25% vacancy rate on the street right now. I've been asked by the board of the bid to come and sort of talk about this, talk about how our owners feel sort of stuck, gummed up. Their income from the buildings are plummeting, and we can't rent them, cannot rent them. I'm an owner myself. I'm a Queens native. We've been involved in that community for about 100 years, actually, as merchants and property owners. We have stores we can't rent. People don't even call. And you know what I read in the newspapers about putting a tax for owners who are warehousing stores. I mean, it's just so shocking to me to think that. I mean, literally, I have a store for 1 year, maybe 2 calls because of the problems with demographics, with online shopping, etc. It's really a problem. I've talked to our tertiary people about, help me understand what this is. And they were saying that part of the issue is that the cutbacks in the Department of Finance and the computer modeling of various neighborhoods and the reduction in people to come out and really get to know the neighborhood has really impacted where there's a great disparity where, say on our street, we have a very high rate of tax, and around the corner, equal building, exactly equal building, just like the lady was talking before, a quarter of the taxes of the one around the corner. It's not feasible for us to go forward with this. And what I'm really asking for is some fairness, for some creativity to be able to address this. I don't believe that this is a class 1 problem against a class 4 problem. It's really a holistic thing that you have to look at. It's what a job you have. It's a Rubik's Cube that you have to deal with. But honestly, it's a serious problem, and I'm glad you're doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask you, sir, may I ask you what's been the trend in the values of your property? I mean, are they catching on that things are getting worse or not in terms of how of your members' properties and in the Department of Finance?
Who do you mean who is catching on?
What I'm asking is, you've said that you're having problems with vacancies.
Yes.
And that this is causing, a challenge to members of your bid, and that if I understood correctly, the way in which valuations were done wasn't catching on to the difficulties you're having.
Correct.
Now, I just want to ask, has this been going on for some years, and is there any sign that it's getting better, or is it just missing it totally?
I mean, I think what's happened is that the retail market has gotten so horrible in the last number of years that it's more. I mean, people always crab about taxes. Let's face it. I mean, I understand the value of taxation for the physical and social fabric of the city. I get that, and it's important. But I think it's just the disconnect now with this huge drop in the market for retail space. That's really what it's about. Okay.
But have you seen your your taxes go down as a result of not having retail?
Well, not really. The valuations have gone up, and it takes quite a long time for even when we file our RPIEs. Right. It takes a number of years for that to get through to where there's going to impact actually a statement. Also, I mean, I've been told that what is it? When on the RPIE we list a vacancy, that in doing the calculation, only 10 to 15% of the vacancy is considered as part of, actually, say if it's 100% vacant, only 15% is considered for adjusting the taxes. I mean, I think a point like that is that we really need some clarity, some fairness, some clear understanding of how these things happen. I mean, as I said, taxes are part of life and part of what we need to make the city run, but we need to have something that's understandable and fair and equitable.
Thank
you.
Our last registered speaker, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time for the mispronunciation, but I'm going to blame it on your handwriting. Zalika Johnson.
Okay. Is there anyone who hasn't registered who wants to speak? Okay.
Take your time.
Don't hurry.
Don't trip.
We don't break
We
your
don't
leg.
want any broken legs. Yeah.
We won't start the clock till you get here.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be short. I know everyone wants to go home. First, I would like to say thank you for coming out. My name is Ericka Johnson. Currently, I work for Senator James Sanders' office, but in my former profession, I worked for Neighborhood Housing Services, where I assisted constituents with property tax exemption applications. I became proficient in the task, and Department of Finance requested for my assistance in reaching out to Southeast Queens residents. Let me take a breather. My request is for the Commission to review the tax rate and explore the possibility of lowering the assessed value cap on the family value percentages. With the stagnant income and consistently increasing tax rate, maybe the leading reason, or one of them, for the increasing number of tax liens and foreclosures in the community. Also, knowing how the formula works for how the market value are derived can help to alleviate some of the confusion around the tax system.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Join us?
Commission, thank you. I didn't register. However, I am a homeowner here in Queens a resident of Queens for nearly 50 years.
Could you just tell us your name?
My name is Brenda Archer, former vice president of Jamaica East Condominium, where I served for 18 years as the vice president. I own a condominium that is a first floor, 2-bedroom condominium, and it's rated as a Class 1A. The taxes are humongous, and the market value, I believe, is less than what it should be. I know that there are other homeowners around in the complex there that have various market values, more so higher than mine is, I put it that way. However, my concern is for condominiums to be considered as a apartment, and you're paying a mortgage, you're paying your maintenance, you're paying for your water bill, and various other little miscellaneous stuff that they try to include into your monthly maintenance. It is more so a higher income for the investment, the people that invest, buying units. In other words, I'm a homeowner on site, but there's some that have invested and bought units there, and the taxes, they're getting away, whereas I'm constantly being hit with, not only me, but other homeowners are getting hit with the increase as well as the increase in maintenance. So my thing is, I would like for you, the commission, to please reconsider what you're doing with those of us that are homeowners, be it 1, 2, 3 family or condominium, as well as co-ops. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who? Okay. Thank you all very much for coming out. I know you have busy, busy lives, and we appreciate very much hearing from you.
And I thank all the commission members for coming out here to Queens.
Thank you. It won't be the last time.
Okay.